Welcome to another episode of the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Glazier, and today's episode is with the incredibly talented Scott Sharrard. Scott may be best known as the band leader for the late Gregg Allman, but he also has a powerful body of work with his own band and is now signed on as a member of the legendary group Little Feat. Scott and I discuss his time with Gregg, their last album together called Southern Blood, and how Scott was able to move into the next chapter of his musical career. He also discusses his upcoming album, which Scott says leans heavily into the Americana genre, which I am very anxious to check out when it's available. Listen in now to that interview with Scott Sharrard. I actually saw you here in Iowa at the Riverside Casino playing with the Gregg Allman band, obviously. And there was a couple of things that I took away from it that I kind of wanted to have you talk about. One of them was that those versions of the songs kind of not completely redone, but were very different from the way that Gregg would play them with the Allman Brothers band, which was incredible. And then the other thing that I kind of took away from it was how amazing you were in your position as a band leader. Just because as a guitar player myself, I tend to watch the guitar players more. And there was a lot of times where you would kind of be, subtly directing things. And then there were some times where you would actually just kind of step all the way back and not even play. And so I just kind of wanted to have you talk a little bit about your role as kind of the band leader and if that kind of carries over into what you're doing now with Little Feat. I guess we'll kind of start there.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you got to see us play together. The Gregg Allman band was certainly treated as a band by Gregg. It was a pretty, he was always, our leader, but he was also really open to collaboration. And, when he asked me to fulfill this role of music director, it kind of came out of us writing songs together and him hearing some of my songs for the first time and covering some of my songs. One of mine, Love Like Kerosene, that I recorded on my record, Scott Sharrard and the Brickyard Band, came out a number of years ago. That kind of opened up the conversation for us to collaborate on writing. And, once he started singing that tune in the show, and then, that opened up the conversation about arranging. Gregg had been, if you go back to the Toller Brothers version of the band in the 80s, the I'm No Angel era, he'd established his own approach. Laid Back, obviously, is one of, my favorite albums of all time. And
right.
So many singer-songwriters, it's one of their favorite albums of all time, as it should be. It's a beautiful work. And it's also, as you observed, that record is also completely different. There's even that version of Midnight Rider on there that's a completely different take on it. And we used to play a version of Whipping Post that he recorded on his album Searching for Simplicity in the 90s. I joined Gregg in 2008, and then I was with him until he passed away in 2017. But I had never even heard of that record, being a lifelong fan. And the first track is a version of Whipping Post that's in 4/4 time, which is how Gregg wrote the song. Also with Midnight Rider, the version on Laid Back is how Gregg wrote the song with that, with his finger-picking part, right? His brother did the finger-picking part we all know from the Allman Brothers version.
Right.
But Gregg had his own pattern and his own feel and his own tempo. So, he always referred to the Allman Brothers as his brother's band, even in his final years when I was with him.
Wow.
I don't think he ever felt any, sole leadership or ownership of that band, ironically being the only living Allman brother. It just wasn't his style. So, and that's part of that is because Gregg was very humble and creative. And I think that, that's really his band it was his chance to actually assert himself, but also lean on all of us. And I guess the role I ended up playing with him is I was the shoulder he leaned on the most. And he gave me some authority to drop the hammer, so he didn't have to do that occasionally.
Yeah, it was. exactly like you say when you're watching it from the audience. I mean, it's definitely Gregg in the corner kind of controlling everything, but you over there kind of, also making the pieces move and fit. And it was just really cool for me to see that. Like I said, I should have spent my whole time watching Gregg play, but I ended up spending a lot of time watching you and seeing what you did, just from a guitar player standpoint. So it's just it's a really cool dynamic, I think, when you can fit in that role and really help the artist, that's headlining everything to make the best performance that they can. So yeah, kudos to you.
Thanks, man. I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's the whole point of music. It's supposed to be an escape, and it's supposed to be a chance to just let everything just kind of fall away and be in the moment. That's when it, for the band and for the audience, that's when it's at its best. So I'm glad you had that experience. And with Gregg, he wouldn't mind you not looking at him. He just wanted you to hear him. That was the beauty of what he did, is he was a musician first. We didn't have a fancy light show, and he didn't shake his ass. It was close your eyes and go on a trip. So I think he'd be happy to hear that review of the show.
Yeah, that's great. And then, like I said, I'm going to kind of go out of order because I still want to touch on some, like how you got started playing guitar and all that. But since you've kind of already talked about this, you obviously joined Gregg, like you said, in 2008. We're with him through, all of that time. And when Southern Blood came out, I actually kind of waited to buy it because it was just too fresh as a fan, him being gone and then the album being there. And since I kind of knew that was his last kind of love letter, it took me a while to actually buy it. And then I think it sat in my house for another week until I was finally like, okay, I'm kind of ready to listen to this and not say goodbye, because he's got a whole body of work. It would take me years to get through, but I was just kind of wondering, like, what are some of your, and I guess it's all going to be fond memories, but what are some of your, I guess, kind of favorite points from recording that particular album?
Well, that album, of course, I get asked about it a lot. I mean, it was a pretty I'm proud to be asked about it, because I ultimately love that record, and it was something I was heavily involved in from way before we brought Don Was on board and went to Muscle Shoals and because on the road, Gregg and I were writing, and we were writing the song My Only True Friend, and it took us about 3 years to write that.
Wow.
So everything, and obviously what's wrapped up in that song is, and I wrote a piece for a great independent publication out of the South called The Bitter Southerner that you can look up. And I told the story of the writing of that song. I'll reserve that today because people can, I've told it a million times, and you can read that. I think that article is actually the best I've been able to, actually sat down and wrote an essay for this publication, and I think it's probably the best trip, because it's quite a trip, the writing of that song. But the writing of that song is really what, again, I find myself finding these themes in my relationship with Gregg, but it always started with us sitting down and jamming and writing songs, and then that would lead to the next whole project, whether it was the 9-piece band lineup and the arrangements we ended up with, or the Back to Making Live album, which was something we collaborated on a lot, or Southern Blood. And, the birth of that song and another song called Everything a Good Man Needs, which I recorded on my last solo album, Saving Grace. That was another one that Gregg and I wrote together. Yeah. And I got Taj Mahal to come in and sing that, which was like, who better to come sing a song that Gregg didn't get a chance to do than his favorite singer? Right. That was cool as hell. So we had all that stuff brewing, and obviously that song didn't make the cut on the record because we ran out of time. But I'd been suggesting for years to Gregg and to his manager, Michael Lehman, to talk to Don Was, because Don, well, first of all, Don's from Detroit. I'm from Detroit. When we finally met, we found out the guy who used to babysit me when I was a kid, my father is a musician, and the guy who used to babysit me when I was a kid, Russ Gibb, used to own and run one of the most popular, it was like the Fillmore East of the Midwest. It's called the
Wow.
Grandy Ballroom in Detroit. He was my babysitter, in the 80s when I was a little kid, and I'm 43 years old, so Some people think I'm younger, some I'm older. Usually, if they haven't seen me, they think I'm older. Because I got a baby face, especially when I shave. But anyway, just to give you the historical context of where Russ fit, he had moved on and he was teaching communications. He was a father figure to my dad, and as it turns out, also a big mentor to Don. So Don and my dad were actually on the same music scene. So I always had this in the back of my mind that, I'll bet you Don and I would see eye to eye on a lot of stuff.
Definitely,
we're kind of, we're built from the same sort of Midwest thing, and particularly the Detroit, the Michigan sound, I guess you could call it. I mean, you could listen to anyone. You could listen to Mitch Ryder or, obviously Motown is the most obvious thing. The MC5. I mean, they all have something in common, and that's that, like all great music, the songs are first, and then they're also built on these really intricate grooves and arrangements. And I've always had this theory that it has to do with being such a predominant manufacturing town post World War II. Everyone has their job on the line, and there's something about the arrangements that come out of Michigan and the music that come out of Michigan. It's lean and it's mean, and that's
very true.
And it can be lush too, but even when it's lush, nothing's stepping on each other. Everyone kind of understands their place. And of course, when Don came on board, the first meeting we had, I remember, was in Atlanta in Gregg's hotel room. We were on the road. Actually, it was in Las Vegas. We met him, but our first really, that wasn't like working on anything. The first time we sat down and started listening to songs and working on stuff was in Atlanta. I think if I remember correctly, I think the sessions at Fame and Muscle Shoals were already booked. And it was pretty 11th hour, all of it, But when Don came in, Gregg and I quickly realized that he shared the same aesthetic that we did, the same ethos that we did in terms of, the song being the priority and the arrangement serving the song, and that sort of being the mantra that would dictate the record. And I think for Gregg in particular, that was very empowering and refreshing because, his band, the Allman Brothers Band, or his brother's band, as he used to say, they became a quote unquote jam band because they were incredible improvisers.
Right.
But, Jimi Hendrix was also an incredible improviser, my favorite musician of all time. But he's never identified as a jam artist. And I feel like Southern rock, Gregg always used to say all rock is Southern. There's no such thing as Southern rock.
Yeah.
And I love that.
I've heard him say that.
That's right on the nose, man. That tells you everything you need to know right there, right?
Yeah.
But, so, people come up with these techniques to market things, and I'm glad the music makes it to everybody. But I think the aesthetic of what he was doing in the Allman Brothers was a little out of balance in terms of the jamming and the guitar solos versus the songwriting. And honestly, the Allman Brothers, without the songs, I mean, let's face it, Dickie Betts, Gregg Allman wrote some of the best rock songs of all time.
Without a doubt.
From the very beginning. So anytime you were seeing the Allman Brothers, you were showing up to hear Whipping Post, the song, Midnight Rider, the song,
right?
Liz Reed, the song, Blue Sky, the song. And then eventually, of course, Ramblin' Man, and that song catapulted them into playing stadiums. And I think for Gregg, he was trying to claw his way back to that. And of course, with Don, we realized pretty soon that we didn't have a lot of material. Right? We had these two songs that Gregg and I had co-written. And I think Gregg was a little bit gun shy about writing, so we looked to the Laid Back album, which I think half that record is cover songs.
Yeah, I think it is.
And we said, hey, look, Gregg is, I always called him the Frank Sinatra of rock and roll. He liked that.
That's
I
cool.
said, here's one of the greatest singers of all time. He was like Frank because, see, Frank could sing blues. He could sing ballads. He could sing up tempo.
Yeah.
You never doubted what he was singing. Gregg was the exact same type of singer. and some people would call, again, all these things. I don't think it gets any more rock and roll than Frank Sinatra, but he's considered to be a jazz singer. But
yeah, a crooner.
his aesthetic was very anything goes, and that's what rock and roll is. It's like a salon of creation where there's no rules in terms of genre.
Yeah.
The best rock and roll is like that. Whether you're talking about Elvis Presley or all the way to Pink Floyd. I mean, there's no rules with this music. The only rule is that you follow the muse. And if it's a little country here and a little R&B there and a little blues here and a little soul there, then fine,
Yeah.
So that was, anyway, it's you've asked some pretty some far-reaching questions, and I'm on a little bit of a tangent, but I haven't been
I'm
gigging
enjoying
this
it.
year, so my energy is not coming out on stage lately. So
Well, good. I'll get some of it here then.
yeah, but that was, I just wanted to kind of paint a picture of what the aesthetic working process was between Gregg and Don and I. We were very compatible. Don brought some incredible cover song ideas to the table, and he's Don Was. His reputation precedes him. And when we got to Muscle Shoals with the band, our road band, which to Don's credit, he followed the muse with Gregg and I and used our road band. Don doesn't always use people's road bands. He does when he works with the Black Crowes and the Rolling Stones, of course. But,
Right.
When he does other projects, he brings in his session players like any great producer does. And, Don, he took a leap of faith, really, because we only had a week to make Southern Blood.
Wow.
And we didn't really rehearse with Don. We rehearsed at sound checks. I rehearsed the band at sound checks. And I kept Don posted on what we were doing and stuff. So when we got there, we just started cutting on the floor. And Gregg was singing the vocals live in an ISO booth on every song, sometimes playing an instrument at the same time. And I think maybe there were a couple days after we all went home where Gregg just stayed there alone and maybe re-sang a couple songs. But I would say 90% of the vocals on that record are live because we hit the road right after that really hard for a while. And then Gregg lost his voice and he never got it back. It had to do with the type of cancer that he had. So we never got his voice back in shape enough for him to re-sing anything. So the amazing thing about that record is it's 90% live on the floor vocals. And, that's something else. It's another way to listen to that record. That's, when you listen to a track like My Only True Friend or Once I Was, which I can tell you those were Live the Life I Love. Those were all live. The band, I overdubbed some guitar solos because of how we were set up, because we were a 9-piece band. We had every inch of that studio mic'd up, But those vocals, go back and listen to them again with that in mind. And when I went down to do my record in Muscle Shoals, when I went down to do Saving Grace, which was I think it was like December of 2016. It was after we had done Southern Blood, and I was so inspired by Gregg, I did the same thing he did. And on that record, I think every song but one song, I did the vocal live with the band on the floor without any edits.
I was gonna say that is probably my favorite way for artists to record is live instead of doing it afterwards in a booth. I understand that's necessary, but you can really feel that on that album. And I just last night listened to your entire Saving Grace probably 3 or 4 times.
Wow.
Just boning up for this interview. I really like to dig in, and you can tell with those vocals. I don't know if it's just my ears that hear it, but it pops and it's really alive, and it's what makes me want to keep listening. So that's cool that you did that.
Well, thanks, man. I learned, I had done that on some of my previous records. Actually, the previous 2 records I'd done, like Ante Up, I did all the vocals live. And then the Brickyard Band record, I did about half of them live. So I had some of that discipline in me. But, after watching that and then being in the exact same booth in Muscle Shoals, I was just inspired by that experience of watching Gregg do that on Southern Blood. And I think it's a really it's a unique aspect of the album that people might not realize about Gregg's vocals on that. And of course, that brings, when you have a track like My Only True Friend or Once I Was, it brings a whole nother immediacy to what that performance means. Because we all knew he was going to die. He got essentially, the clock started about a year or two before we got in the studio. He knew he was terminally ill, and we didn't know how much time we had with him. So when he was singing on that record, that was in the back of all our heads, even though we were all, we were a band. Right. So we loved each other, and we still do. We still stay in touch. And we became a family out of that experience with Gregg, and we were all about, having some good barbecue and laughing, and just the whole thing was very lighthearted, which was a nice contrast to how heavy the material was. It's funny because I can't listen to it either, because when I hear it, I'm just like, oh my God, this is so heavy. I can't take it. But when I was there, it was just like, this is so much fun. Let's keep going, you know?
Right. And so I just recently saw the Scott Rosenbaum video that he shared with your set, kind of doing your tribute to Gregg, which was incredible to kind of hear you tell some of those stories, and to watch you perform those on your own was really, really incredible. And so I just kind of wanted to mention that, just in case anybody listening hasn't seen it, that they go out and watch that, because that's a really powerful video. And I heard you on a podcast kind of talking about that experience, and how basically after the last note you just had to kind of get out of there because it was so heavy and such a powerful moment. And that really comes through in the video. So I wanted to mention that, and I'll link that video as well so people can see that wherever that's at. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, or if just putting the link on is good. People can go check it out and kind of take away from it what they need to.
Yeah, I mean, we did the performance here. I live in New York City. I've been here 23 years, even though I'm from Michigan by way of Wisconsin. So I'm a child of the Rustbelt, but I've been in the city. I've been in the city long enough to have my film forum card and my Met donations in. But yeah, I mean, we did the show at Rockwood Music Hall, and which is this amazing multi-stage venue on the Lower East Side that has been kind of it's been sort of a clubhouse incubator for my music for like the last few years in particular. In fact, we've been doing like an annual Christmas show there every year, and where I have a lot of guests and stuff. I mean, it's just a fantastic place. And we usually play at stage 2, which is the larger room, holds about 150 people. But downstairs there's a stage called stage 3, and it's this beautiful little venue that holds about, I don't know, maybe 60, 70 people. It's about half the size, with a low ceiling and down in the basement. My manager at the time, Jesse Guillermo, had the idea to do a concert at that time. So he contacted the venue and booked it. And this was like a week or two after Gregg's funeral, I want to say. So it was all very fresh. And it was obviously it was a very emotional experience going to Macon, Georgia, and being with the family, and being at the service, and being in the big house with Dwayne's family, Galadriel and Donna, his widow, and his daughter, and just, it was a very intense week because everyone was sharing with me Gregg's feelings about me and about the band we had and all that. It was pretty heavy. And by the time I got to that concert stage, I was running the tunes by myself, and I had never played these songs by myself. Gregg and I played not just with the band, we played a lot of duo shows, and you'll see them online.
Yep.
In fact, one of the last shows, the second to last show that I played with him, was a duo show at Red Rocks. We did like a 1-hour set right before ZZ Top. Yeah, I had to carry him on stage with his friend Chank and our road manager Vince Sutherland. I mean, it was, he was trying to go on stage. So when I was rehearsing for that film that Scott Rosenbaum and I made, concert film, you know, I was getting through everything fine, but once the Tim Buckley song that's on Southern Blood, I fought to get that song. Well, I fought Gregg, I should be specific, to get that song on Southern Blood. Because he used to warm up with that song all the time in the dressing room. And when we would write, you know, in hotel rooms on the road and when we would write at his house, he always loved to sing and play that song. And we would warm up with it. We would jam on it. And I was always telling him, you got to record it. And he was like, I don't know. And that all the way down to the last minute. And we got him to do it, one take on Southern Blood. But that song for me was, I don't know. There was something about him singing and playing that song in particular for me. And when I was rehearsing it, I kept, and you know, I'm not like an over the top emotional crier, but I could not even rehearse the song and get through it.
That's tough.
Like from beginning to end, those words, you know, thinking about that moment and thinking about his life and thinking about the words, which the words to that song are just absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah. It's a beautiful piece of music. And so when we got to the show, I had it originally in the middle of the set. I said, I got to close with this. And basically, I said, I'm going to play that song and then I'm going to fucking lose it. And that's basically what happened.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was able to lose it off stage. But you know, my wife was there, and we, you know, she was, you know, friends with Gregg too, of course, and you know, he really treated us like family, and he was incredibly generous with me, you know, creatively as a friend. You know, he was my boss. It did start as a professional relationship, but I think until I lost him, I didn't realize how personal it was, you know?
Yeah. Wow, that's really heavy. That's why I wanted to mention the video, because it's just your performances are fantastic, and I think, you know, sometimes I don't know if people realize how much emotion really goes into songs. You know, the lyrics, the music itself, the stories behind it. It's kind of all tied in, and when you see a performance like you gave there, it's just it's really powerful. That's about all I can say.
Well, thanks, man. I'm glad you saw it. I mean, I think, you know, like I said before, a lot gets lost with Gregg because of the incredible and, you know, just the mind-blowing innovation and legacy of the Allman Brothers Band. You know, I think everybody needs to ultimately make enough room for Gregg Allman, the singer-songwriter, and the Allman Brothers Band and their brilliance at interpreting his songs and interpreting Dickie's songs. But, you know, we took hits with Gregg too, you know, the band we had, because people would say, you know, oh, you know, must be hard to just play 8-bar guitar solos half the night. And it's like, well, you know, I get to play as long as I want on 2 or 3 of them. Like, right. How much do you need to hear, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, would you rather hear Gregg sing for 30 minutes or for 2 hours?
Right.
You know? That was kind of how we looked at it in the band, is we had the best seat in the house, because we got to hear Gregg Allman sing every night for an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Yeah. You know, that was the incredible thing that I really took away from the show, where I saw you guys live, and it kind of brings me back to a story that I've always kind of heard about when Gregg first came into the band, that he had brought like whipping post, and I think Barry actually took it. I've always kind of read Barry took that and reworked it, and I always kind of wondered, like, well, but it's Gregg Allman's song, like how would he rework it to be totally different? And then when I saw you guys play it live, it was totally different, but it was completely fresh, and you know, without kind of overstepping, I would say that's probably the way he intended it when he wrote it to begin with. So it was really cool to see those songs redone and reworked his way, I guess.
There were ultimately, you know, like anything, I mean, everyone's got an opinion, but there were ultimately 2 camps with the Gregg Allman show. You know, is people who were disappointed there wasn't, you know, a million guitar solos and that we didn't play Ramblin' Man, of course. And then the other people were the people who were like, I feel like I've won the lottery, because now instead of listening to Gregg sing 4 songs in an Allman Brothers show, I get to hear him sing 15 songs.
Right.
You know?
Yes. Yeah, that's
So
exactly the way I came away from it. I mean, it was different, but it was it was so him. I think so. I really enjoyed it. um, and so saving, I kind of want to shift, I guess, onto kind of what you're working on now. So did you actually get to go out and tour with Little Feat then last year?
yeah, well, I did. So Little Feat, interesting thing too, just to contextualize. I, I've kind of flirted with the idea of being a sideman over the years, but I think, I was 30 years old when I joined Gregg's band in 2008, and I think I realized when I joined Gregg's band that I was back to, I was in garage bands when I was in the 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. Like, I'm a tribal musician. I'm all about being in bands.
Hmm.
And Gregg made it clear to me when I joined his band, I had this mindset of, okay, I'm the sideman, so I have to do this and I have to do that. And he made
Right.
it clear to me pretty early on. He's like, no, man, you're in my band. Like, do what you want with this, do what you want with that. I said, oh, this
Huh.
is cool.
Cool.
And, for me, it was a revelation because when I was a kid, my Beatles and Rolling Stones, as much as I love them, and especially the Stones, were very, very, very influential for me from the earliest age. But my personal Beatles and Rolling Stones, the bands I felt like I owned, the bands I saw, because when I saw Mick Jagger, I couldn't relate to that at all. I said, I'm never going to be like this guy. Or Keith,
Right.
I mean, he was way too cool. But when my dad in the 80s took me to see Little Feat and took me to see the Allman Brothers, they looked like me.
Uh huh.
And the music they played was a perfect curation of all the music that I loved. The blues, the jazz, the early rock and roll, the country, the soul, the songwriting, the grooves,
Everything mixed
the
in.
whole thing. The whole thing was a combination of all the music I already loved at that early age because I was being exposed to all kinds of great music from when I was a tiny kid. So to me, they were my Beatles and Rolling Stones, the Allman Brothers and Little Feat specifically. And my greatest singing influences that I could relate to were Gregg and Lowell George.
Hmm.
And for me, I was an awkward, little middle class white kid who was into like Mad Magazine and Chuck Berry when I was 10.
Yeah.
Okay, when I started playing guitar, and to me, when I was listening to Lowell George, I was listening to Waiting for Columbus all the time. And then when I saw a picture of him, I said, oh my God, that's me. I'm an overweight, awkward white kid who loves Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry and Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
Like I'm getting a slide and I'm going to be this guy. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to sing. And with Gregg, it was a little different because, I heard Gregg sing and I was just like, it sounded like the voice of a 70-year-old man
Yeah.
when he was 19, And then when I saw him live, it's just his vibe was so heavy. I obviously never got to see Lowell live. He died in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I'm sharing all this is I'm talking about these revelations were when I was 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. So
Wow.
you're talking about when, the concrete is wet and has just been poured is when these bands become my salvation musically. Because I looked at Hendrix and I said, that's my favorite musician of all time, hands down, but I'm never going to be this guy. And I looked at, Muddy Waters and said, this isn't who I am. Who am I? I can never be a black man from Mississippi as much as I love it, as much as I understand that it is the root of all the great music that comes out of America. I will never be a blues man, and it's not my place.
Right.
But who am I? What am I going to be? And how can I use and spread the love and the brilliance of American blues music and still come up with my own songs that reflect who I am and tell my story? And Little Feat and the Allman Brothers gave me the answer to those questions.
Wow.
And when I got to know Gregg, from the second we met, it was like it was almost like he was a family member or someone I grew up with that I had reconnected with. In terms of the music, I'm speaking specifically in terms of the music right now. As a musician, the familiarity to the core of appreciation of all these different styles that we had in common was really resonant. And to bring that up to Little Feat, you know, Bill Payne, I'd been sitting in with the Doobie Brothers, and those guys have been really supportive of my musicianship and career since I met them when I was on the road with Gregg Allman. And they're just wonderful people, especially, you know, Tom Johnson and Pat Simmons are just wonderful, wonderful guys and have been so supportive. And when Paul Barrere was sick back in 2019, you know, Bill Payne was asking around, and he asked my buddy, you know, Jay Collins, who played sax with Gregg Allman, and also with Little Feat. Actually, we can't shake each other, Jay and I. And he asked Jay. And then of course the Doobie Brothers were out with Gregg's road manager, Vince Sutherland, who's also been a great mentor to me. And he was out with our merch person from Gregg Allman, and he had Mark Quinones.
Oh yeah.
In the Doobie Brothers.
Sure.
Okay, so all my buddies are on tour with the Doobie Brothers, and Bill Payne's running around backstage going, Paul Barrere can't make the last two shows. Larry Campbell can't make the last two shows. I got to find a guy to do this job, to sing and play Little Feat stuff. And everyone he asked, they said my name.
Wow.
And he finally called me and he said, now listen, I need a guy to sing and play this stuff. You know, so Bill Payne is talking to me on the phone, and I'm like, Bill, you've come to the right place. This is one of my favorite bands of all time. I know all your music. And he goes, Scott, let me tell you something. Everybody says that who comes to play with us. And then he goes, they come and play with us and they make mistakes. And he's like, I just want to make sure, you know, you get the sound. I'm like, don't worry. I said, if I F this up, I will never forgive myself, is basically what I told him. Because, you know, I'm always the 15-year-old in the crowd in the 20th row watching me going, who does this idiot think he is? You know? That's always in there somewhere as motivation. So basically, I show up. First gig is in Long Island. I'm subbing for Paul Barrere, okay?
Uh-huh.
Who's also he's just an incredible singer-songwriter, guitar player as well, you know? I get to the venue, and the guys call me, and they say, Scott, we just found out that Paul passed away.
Wow.
As I'm standing at soundcheck waiting for the band to show up for my first gig.
Crazy. And
I've never met Fred Tackett. I've never met Kenny Gradney. I've never met Sam Clayton. Okay, so they walk in and they're late. They walk in. They're all broke up. And the first thing I do with these guys is basically hug them and tell them that I'm sorry they lost their friend.
Wow.
We rehearsed a little bit. Then we got ready to go on stage that night, and Bill very just took the reins. He handled it beautifully. Came up to me, he goes, Scott, I have to tell the fans that, Paul has passed away. And then we're going to, play the show. So we went up and Bill talked and he told the fans, and there was an audible gasp. And then it was basically like, all right, here we go.
Wow.
So, I mean, the energy in the room, that was one of the most important moments of my life, was right before we hit that first note that night, because as a lifelong fan, I said, okay, now it's not just the legacy of Will George and Richie Hayward that's on this stage. Mm-hmm. It's the legacy of Paul, who everyone just found out died today.
Yeah, man, that's a heavy gig.
First show with barely any rehearsal. And I mean, look, I could not wipe the smile off my face the whole gig. And it was just the most, and then to get to sing these songs, to get to sing a few of these songs, I mean, it was just, I was like floating on air, man. And these guys were playing like they lost their friend. I mean, they were playing their hearts out and just playing great. And we got to the end of the gig and we played an encore, and then after the encore, we went out to do a bow, and Bill walked across the stage and shook my hand on stage, and he goes, "You do know our music, man." And then I was basically, that was basically it. I mean, that night everyone came up to me and they were like, "You're in the band." So, and then we did another gig in Pennsylvania, and then we went to Jamaica, and when we went to Jamaica, it was more, we did a few shows and it was more affirmation. It was more, I got to talk to everybody individually, and they all said, you've passed the test. If you want to be in this band, you can be in this band. And it was, I can't tell you how much I love these guys, how great they are, how great they still play. And we were supposed to do a lot in 2020, but look, we're writing a lot. We're going to make a record as soon as we all get the shot.
Great.
So, we're demoing stuff. We're making tracks. We did a video, a cover of Long Distance Love with my buddy Amy Helm singing with me on it.
Yeah.
We did a video for that. Scott Rosenbaum directed that.
I saw that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
So that was like a COVID collaboration video, So we're all just waiting for the shot, man. And the whole music industry is. I mean, there were also, my band, the Scott Sharrard band, we had a whole, back in March, we had finally secured a major booking agent. And we were going to go to, I had gigs under my own name in Japan, and we were going to go to Canada and a few other places, and also, play all over the U.S. So that all got shelved too. So it's been kind of a, just like everything, it's been a pretty flat earth year for me.
Yeah. Have you found that the not being able to tour has kind of been more productive, or is it as far as like songwriting? I know you just Saving Grace is kind of the most recent album, but I'm sure you're constantly writing, but do you have stuff already kind of scheduled, like as soon as we get to go out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to schedule studio time here, or?
Oh, I miss the world, man. I mean, I no bones about it. The only thing I've gotten out of this is, well, first of all, since March, I just basically went to my team and I said, it works on my solo stuff. And I said, look, if we all want to keep working, I've got to teach on Zoom. I'm going to teach songwriting, singing, and guitar. And we went for it, and I've been teaching, between 10 and 30 hours a week every week since March.
Wow, that's great.
On Zoom. So that saved my family financially, to be honest with you. I mean, I get some royalties, but it's not anything that's going to get my two boys and my wife and I through a year.
Right.
So not even close, So that, and I did some streaming concerts. I did a series where I did full album sets all by myself.
Wow.
I filmed them. I recorded them with pro audio. My friend has a beautiful house. Joni Ellenson has this beautiful house in Woodstock. And I went in the basement and I put basically a media studio in there myself over the summer during the height of COVID from like between May and August. And I did a series called the American Songbook Series. And I did Little Feat Sailing Shoes. I did Gregg Allman's Southern Blood. Mm-hmm. I did Gregg Allman's Laid Back. And I did Saving Grace, all solo. And I told stories and played them. And then I got my producer engineer, Charlie Martinez, to mix them. They look and sound pretty good.
Yeah.
There's video footage interspersed. And my buddy, Chris Pizzolo, who does, he's a publicist. He works with me sometimes. He edited it for me and put it together. So that's all up on my YouTube channel. If you go to the Scott Sharrard YouTube channel, it's called the American Songbook Series. And that did pretty well financially. I mean, we just did a Venmo thing, but it people were very generous and supportive through that over the summer. And then when it got to the late summer, August through kind of November, I actually got my band together. We did a few shows, and outside, of course, in these socially distanced venues. But one of them, the first one we did actually, is we did Jimi Hendrix's Band of Gypsies album as the final installment of the Songbook Series. We did that power trio in front of an audience of about 150 people or so in Woodstock outside at night. And the craziest part of that is I did not know this, but I found out the day before the show that we had scheduled the show on, I think it was Jimi Hendrix's, either his birthday or the day he passed away. I can't remember now.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
It's like a cosmic weird coincidence. So anyway, that's kind of what I've been doing this year, and I just started working for this new company called Lively, that great musician named Mark Brownstein started. He plays in a band called the Disco Biscuits. There's a lot of great teachers on this platform, and I'm also giving house concerts through them and stuff. They act as kind of like an agent for doing online teaching and performances. So
Oh, gotcha.
I just started working with them to kind of, expand my reach a little bit. But I got to be honest, man, I don't see this thing letting up next year.
Yeah.
In terms of live shows inside, I don't see it.
Yeah, that's going to be
I don't see it at all.
That's going to be tough if this keeps going the way it is. I mean, it's amazing that you're able to kind of transition and do some other stuff like the teaching. And that's, I mean, kind of selfishly it's amazing for people who would not normally have access to a fantastic musician, singer, songwriter, guitar player like yourself that can actually be able to get those lessons kind of one-on-one. It's absolutely insane. I mean, obviously you'd rather be out on the road, but that's kind of a cool thing for people who might want to sit down and learn from a professional musician.
Yeah, well, I've been teaching too on and off for 20 years, and I went to an arts high school in Milwaukee where I had just these incredible jazz teachers. So I have a formally educated background, and I love teaching. I mean, I love it. And I've done a lot of lecturing and teaching at Berklee College of Music in Boston, and I've done it for other universities when I've been on the road, and high schools. And I mean, I'm a very, very passionate educator, and I look at what I do as like kind of preserving the traditions of American roots music.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've spent all this time, when I was a kid, I was lucky. I had like Hubert Sumlin was one of our local guitar players, and I used to, study with him backstage and jam with him. And there were a bunch of other musicians you've never heard of from the Chitlin circuit who I used to tour with, like Willie Higgins and Stokes. And this is all when I was a teenager. So I kind of started with that angle, and then, eventually through Jay Collins, started doing some record dates and playing an opening with my band for Levon Helm, and then got to play with Levon, and I actually played Levon's last show in his band. And then, Gregg, obviously, and now Little Feat and everything else in between. And, with Gregg, it was like, it brought me through to so many incredible collaborations, everything from, working with Taj Mahal and, to Chris Stapleton and Jason Isbell. And, I met all these people when I was working with Gregg, and they're all relationships that have endured. And I suppose the through line, the reason I call it American roots music is, everybody's got their labels for things, blues, Americana, jam. To me, it's all just rock and roll, to be honest.
Yeah.
But that's what I do when I teach. I look at it as kind of like giving a person some disciplines and some, but really, contextualizing what is the music you love and why is it what it is, and what are the real ways to learn this? How do musicians find the incentive to practice and follow their passion? And a lot of it has to do with recognizing that all these different styles of music in America are folk art, and they're essentially, all of them are oral tradition. They're not based on traditional music theory or traditional methods of learning an instrument. There are ergonomics to playing a guitar and singing that are completely different from opera and classical music as applied to American music, because the sound you're producing is completely different. And the thought process, I mean, when you play classical music or you sing or play operatic music, you are serving the composer or the libretto or the writer of the material. You are not expressing yourself. In American music, it's not only about expressing yourself and improvising and taking the mic and having everyone look at you. It's also about supporting whoever has the floor and doing it in a way that's creative and spontaneous. It's democratic. It's who we are. It doesn't exist anywhere else. It never has.
That brings up one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and I always find this interesting with musicians, is like if you think of a guy like Gregg Allman, and I don't know, I mean, I just don't know what kind of actual formal musical education he had, but obviously he did a ton of session stuff, and with him, I think it was a lot of putting himself into that music, and maybe not so much the music theory behind it, but I always am curious to ask, guys like yourself, if you think it's necessary to learn all the theory and all the stuff that goes behind that, or whether somebody can just be naturally gifted and just walk in and kind of knock it out of the park. You know what I mean? Because I'm not formally educated in music. I can listen to an album and I can play it on guitar, but I have no idea a lot of times what the chords are or where I'm going with it.
Well, it all depends on what your goal is, right? So there's like, I always like to say, like, there's Bob Dylan and then there's Jimi Hendrix.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or there's Leonard Cohen and then there's Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
So you know, what does it take? Because it kind of comes down to what do you gravitate towards, and this is why, you know, when I teach music, whether it's to an ensemble or it's lecturing or it's one-on-one, I always try to, especially when it's one-on-one or an ensemble where I can actually interact with people and figure out who they are and what they want. You've really got to figure out, what do you gravitate towards? Is it the production, the arranging, the words, you know, the lyrical content, the melodic content, the instrumentation, the improvisation? What is it you gravitate towards? And then you kind of build backwards from there. Because if you look at, let's take Leonard Cohen, for example, because I think he's a very extreme example. I mean, obviously, one of the greatest songwriters in history.
Sure.
But I would argue that his lead foot is his lyrics, and he started as a novelist and a poet. So his best foot forward was the lyrics, and he built it backwards from there to where, if maybe you get to his synthesizer playing, is the most, like in a traditional music sense, it is the most egregious and terrible sound. But when you put the voice and the lyrics and the arrangement with it, it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's always this balance of art and craft. And it kind of starts with the discipline is, what crafts do you need to master? Do you need to master the craft of improvising with a slide on an electric guitar? Or do you want to master the craft of lyric writing? Or do you want to master the craft of arranging for a rhythm section? Or do you want to do all of it, like Prince and Stevie Wonder? See, I always wanted to be, you know, obviously what I was saying before about the Allman Brothers and Little Feat. See, the thing is that depends on being in a band with Richie Hayward or Dickie Betts
right.
or Gregg Allman, right?
Yeah.
So before I was in a band with Gregg Allman or Bill Payne, okay? Before I was in a band with these guys, it was just me. When I was a teenager, most of the time, when I was creating music. Now, I was playing gigs, I was touring, but I was always the quote-unquote sideman when I was touring. So there was a singer, he had a way he wanted to play things, and a lot of these guys were very established blues artists. So I just had to keep my mouth shut and do what was necessary for the music, which was an incredible lesson.
Sure.
But meanwhile, I was going home with an 8-track cassette recorder, and I was learning to play bass, drums, guitar, and sing. So my first 2 solo albums, Dawnbreaker and Analog Monologue, Dawnbreaker, I think like 7 of the 9 tracks, I'm playing every instrument, the keys, the bass, the drums, the guitar. So I was on this road of like, okay, you know, I'm going to do what Prince and Stevie Wonder did, because I hear music in totality. You know, I play all the instruments. When I write a song, I hear the whole arrangement. I've always been like that. You know, so that's kind of who I became as a musician. And then I went on this, like I said, in 2008, you know, I was on this whole path of like trying to get signed as a solo artist, where I was playing all the instruments and all this stuff. And then, you know, I meet Gregg Allman, and then it's like, oh, well now, you know, instead of, you know, trying to keep knocking my head against the wall, trying to get a record deal, here I am working with a genius. Maybe, you know, let's see what I get out of this.
Yeah.
And what working with Gregg did was it brought me back to, and I should mention Levon too, because I met him around the same time. They both brought me back to when I was a kid, and they brought me back to the blues and early rock and roll and soul music and country music, and you know, they brought me back to the basics. And I said, okay, I got to get back to focusing on the songs from just the guitar chair or just from singing. And it deepened my musicianship greatly to sort of go back to the well, because sometimes you take for granted what you learned as a kid. And they really helped reconnect me to that. But I think that's where, with learning an instrument, I mean, you got to take it one step at a time. Do you want to improvise better? If you want to do that, do what I do with my students and go get a tab, one of those Wolf Marshall books on Freddie King, and get the tab and the recording and slow the recording down with an app, and learn Hideaway from front to back.
Right.
Then learn San Jose, then learn the Stumble. That was how I learned to play. Yeah. That's how I learned how to improvise. I started with Chuck Berry, and then I went to Freddie King and Jimmy Reed. Those were how I started.
Incredible teachers.
I mean, you're never going to play anything cooler than a Jimmy Reed rhythm guitar lick.
Right.
That's the first thing I ever learned on the guitar. That's what got me to be a musician, was Jimmy Reed's shuffle patterns.
Shuffle patterns? Wow.
That's why I'm a musician.
Huh.
And you know what's funny? One day I was talking to Gregg, and he said to me, he goes, "Man, what was the first thing you ever learned to play on the guitar?" And I said, "Oh man, it's Baby What You Want Me to Do, that Jimmy Reed shuffle pattern." He goes, "Son of a bitch, same thing for me and my brother."
Wow.
So I mean, that tells you everything you need to know right there. I mean,
Yeah.
How many generations of that is Jimmy Reed? And Keith Richards said the same thing. I mean, that was one of the breakthrough moments for him on guitar, was when he learned that pattern.
Yeah, it all kind of boils down to the blues.
Well, I mean, the blues is, I have a lot of different analogies, which are food related, because my other passion is food. But if you ever go to my Instagram, you'll see I've been doing a lot of barbecue lately. I'm starting to get professional level. But the thing is that, like, the blues is like the roux in the gumbo, right? It's like the blues is like the butter, the flour, and the salt. So you get that going, and now you can take your gumbo towards a seafood gumbo or a meat gumbo, and that's all the different genres. But the other thing I like to say is blues is like salt. You can't make a dessert without salt. You can't make anything that's worth eating without salt. You can't make American music without blues. It's like trying to make food without salt.
Right. That's a cool analogy. I like that one. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it all the time when I'm, all the things I've learned about cooking. My wife's a trained pastry chef,
Oh,
but
wow.
all the things my hobby is cooking, and it's like all the things I've learned from that is that seasoning, and that's the seasonings, man. It's the blues.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really incredible.
The first, did you watch that Ken Burns documentary, by the way,
Yes.
about country music?
Yes, I did. That was
So
mind-blowing.
how great, of all the things, all the revelations from that, how amazing was it to find out that both Jimmy Rogers and Hank Williams, the architects of country and western music, learned everything they knew about songwriting and playing the guitar from black men from the Delta playing blues.
I know. That's it always seems like great musicians start that way. I don't know. Well, all the ones I listen to.
It's the root. It's Africa is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a depth of feeling, understanding, and storytelling that will never be surpassed.
Right.
And like I was saying to you earlier, I'm not a practitioner of blues. I use blues as the basis for what I do, because I think that the human emotion of it is a universal principle. But a lot of things about the lyrical content and style, they should only be for blues men, I think, or women, blues women as well.
Right.
Let's not leave them out. Let's not leave out Ma Rainey and Coco Taylor, right?
No kidding.
So I mean, that's the thing, is like, I just see it, for me personally, in my journey in music and life, I start everything with the blues, and then I let it take me wherever it needs to go. And sometimes it gets so far that the only thing in the song that has anything to do with the blues is the guitar or maybe the kick drum pattern. You know?
Yeah, I was gonna say on your Saving Grace album, man, there's a lot of like funky R&B stuff, but then there's like the everything a good man needs, which is super. I mean, just incredible. Your slide playing is incredible. The whole structure of it's cool, and it's all kind of, it seems rooted in that. But like you said, it just kind of it takes you everywhere.
Well, I got a funk problem. I'm from the Midwest, so
yeah.
we like everything on the one.
Right.
It's that whole Minneapolis thing. Milwaukee, Chicago, Minneapolis. That's Detroit. I mean, it's really, I can't shake it, man. Like for me, like musical Prozac is like the Gap Band. Like
oh yeah, that's awesome.
Anytime I need to spiritually reset, it's either going to be, if I'm in one mood, it's like Warren Zevon. If I'm in the other mood, it's the Gap Band.
I kind of do that with Aretha Franklin and James Brown. That's kind of my funk reset.
See, my problem with Aretha and James, I grew up listening to their stuff all the time, but I got to be honest, man. When I put on someone like Aretha or James Brown, it's so heavy that I can't do anything if it's on. I can't even drive a car if it's on.
Yeah.
It's just too heavy, man. Like, I have to sit and listen to it. I mean, that gospel record, and I'm sure you've seen that documentary that finally came out. Yeah.
Yeah, the one they did in the church.
It's just insane.
Yes, so much talent. So crazy. Well, the only other question that I was going to kind of ask you, which you've already answered a number of times, I think, is with guys like you who kind of get into a band with someone like Gregg Allman, or you've played with, kind of everybody, is there anybody left that you'd still kind of like to collaborate? Maybe artists people don't know that you're a fan of, or, something that you're working on as far as collaborations go?
There are so many. I got to be honest with you. There's a lot of like. The music industry is just, as an industry, as a business, is just non-existent. Let's just, at this moment, it is totally non-existent.
Right.
Because there are no promoters, there are no agents right now. At this moment, everybody's furloughed. So we're in a pause. And I think what I hope is that we learn again how to monetize music outside of touring. And I got to say, it was very instructive for me to do this teaching and see how profitable and how much desire there is for it. The only reason I bring it to this is because I can't believe the talent of all these artists that I know of now who are not known and should be. There's this amazing artist out of Canada named Garrett Mason, who you should check out.
Yeah, I will.
It's kind of like the list goes on and on. But, there's these Canadian dudes. I mean, there's like Joey Landreth and Ariel Posen. They're playing their asses off.
Ariel.
Yeah, they're playing great. They're writing great. They're singing great. I mean, they're making great stuff. And those guys I think are doing pretty well. But I would like to, in the future, I mean, collaboration is like my fuel. It's like, as a musical director, I've gotten to do so much cool stuff with like multiple artists and guitar players and singers that I think the list would just be too long.
Huh.
But another artist I love, who's, I don't even know what he's doing right now, but who's been a big influence on me, is Lewis Taylor out of the UK. He kind of fell off the scene, but he's just an absolutely brilliant artist. And it's just, there's so much talent out there, man. That's what I always say. It's like I'm constantly coming upon players and singer-songwriters where I'm just like, how does, sometimes you look around and, I know music has a long tradition of having kingmakers and stuff, but I think these days, a lot of the problems we're having is a lot of people, there's just a lot of talent, and we got to find a way for more of these voices to forge careers and reach people. That's way above my pay grade, but but there's plenty of people I would want to collaborate with. But first we got to figure out if we can all be inside an enclosed room without worrying about dying.
Right. I know. It's crazy.
Or most importantly, I mean, I'm relatively healthy, so my fear more is that, you know, I'm going to make my mother-in-law sick, or I'm going to make someone sick, you know, standing in a line at a coffee shop. I'm going to give it to somebody who has a disease. You know, It's like, it's terrifying to think of being asymptomatic.
Right.
So there's a lot of challenges that come before we start making art in the way we should, you know, which is together, you know. But I'm ready for it. So I'm trying to keep my knife sharp over here. It's a challenge.
Well, I've watched, like I said, a number of your videos, like the Daryl's House stuff, and I mean, I guess I didn't realize how good of a singer you were until I really started digging into your stuff. I mean, it's incredible stuff. I absolutely love your singing, your playing. So I kind of always tell people that I hope that once 2021 comes around that everybody's kind of hiding the best stuff and there's a new musical renaissance that comes out of it. So we'll see.
Well, I can tell you from my piece, I've got my 6th solo album. I'm finishing up right now. I was just working on it yesterday, and for me, I don't know how many of my records you've checked out, but that Saving Grace was my 5th solo album. So I've been hammering away at these damn things for a while. But this 6th record that's going to come out at some point next year is easily my most personal record and easily the best collection of original songs I've ever come up with, hands down. It's just a really, really heavy collection, and I got Bill Payne's he's playing on a couple tracks actually next week. I just sent him a couple songs, and Amy Helm is on it, and wonderful. The only time I've ever brought in another guitar player to play on one of my albums on a few songs is my buddy Dan Littleton, who's absolutely one of my favorite guitarists. He came in and did some guitar tracks, and you know, Justin Shipper, one of the best really innovative pedal steel player from Nashville, is on there. So I'm really excited. I feel like this new solo record I'm working on actually has something to contribute to the Americana genre. I feel like it's going to really, if people get to hear it and it gets to have an impact in the market, which I'll try to figure that out. I'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah.
I feel like it could actually have some impact on how we listen to the Americana genre, because that's what I'm going to release it as. But I'm trying to expand what that means. I'm trying to, like, I think where I'm at this point is nobody wants to call anything rock and roll. So Americana is what we're going to call it. How do we open the tent up enough to get all our rock and roll tendencies inside it? And I think Chris Stapleton and Isbell have done a hell of a job, and I love those guys, and I love their music, and I think you know, they've opened a lot of doors for all of us, to be honest. They've taken a lot of chances, and they've kind of plowed through and really done their own thing, and I feel like this record is my first chance to do that. So hopefully I can get it out there. Yeah,
that's really exciting. I'll be very anxious to hear that.
Yeah, it was fun talking to you, man. Thanks for having me on, and you know, keep me posted, bro. More to come.
I really can't express enough gratitude to Scott for taking the time to talk about his amazing career and what's on the horizon. Head over to his website, scottsharrard.com, to follow along with everything that he's working on and where all of his social media links are listed. You can also find his YouTube channel, where you can see Scott's performance of Melissa that he performed at Rockwood Music Hall that was filmed by Scott Rosenbaum of Red Hawk Films. I have to also thank my sponsors, Black Cat Bone Productions and Pure Mountain Coffee, for the continued support of the podcast. Thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you all down the road.